Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my annual look at my favorite and least favorite films of the year, as well as some special awards that I give out at the end of every year. Now, this is usually a show that I try to make look as polished as I can, with clips and everything else, but as I mentioned on this week's Charts with Dan, I am dealing with a family situation at the moment. That's why I am on the road, and I will be on the road through the rest of the week. So this may not be quite as good looking as I usually like this episode to be, but the important thing is that my choices haven't changed, the movies that I love haven't changed, and we still get to talk about a great year in film. Now, I've put time codes in the description below, so if you want to jump ahead to what I think were the best movies of the year, you can go ahead and do that. But one thing I always like to do is give out some fun little awards in the tradition of the Screenies, which is an award show that we used to do back when I was at Screen Junkies. So let's give out some special awards to the movies of 2025. And we'll start with the award for the weirdest trend, the strangest thing that kept popping up in movies over and over again this year. And I'm giving that to actors playing double roles, whether that was twins in Mickey 17, two Robert De Niro's in The Alto Knights, twins again in Sinners, twins again in The Monkey, twins again in Twinless, or two separate androids in Predator Badlands. There were a lot of actors that were playing against themselves this year, which I guess is something that's been done for a while, but it was odd that it kept popping up again in 2025. Next up is the award for Best First Act of a Movie, and really Best First Act when you compare it to the rest of the film. And that award goes to Catherine Bigelow's A House of Dynamite. For the first 30 minutes of this movie, I thought, wow, this is one of the best movies I've seen this year. And then the movie decides to make some very interesting storytelling decisions. If you haven't seen the film, I will not spoil it, but what I will say is that the first act is not impressive the second time you see it, or the third time you see it, or when you see what they decide to do with the rest of the movie. But it was maybe the best first act of a movie that I saw all year. Next up is an award that I give just about every year. It's the award for Best Movie You Didn't Watch, a movie that I thought was really good that either didn't get a huge theatrical release or you just didn't see it. The runner-up for this is Sovereign, which features two great performances from Nick Offerman and Jacob Tremblay. But I'm giving this award to Lurker, which was actually the last movie that I saw this year, the last new film before I started making up the list. It's about a pop star played by Archie Madekwe who brings someone into his inner circle, played by Theodore Pellerin, who he then regrets letting into his inner circle. Two great performances that headline the film. It really wasn't given much of a theatrical release, but you can get it on premium video on demand. I believe you can also stream it on Mubi, who handled the distribution for the film, and it is definitely worth checking out. Next up is an award called the I Can't Believe It Worked Award, and I'm giving that one to The Naked Gun. Doing a reboot of the kind of comedy that we haven't seen in theaters in a long time, and a beloved comedy at that, shouldn't really have worked, but I think it actually did. And a lot of that credit goes to Akiva Schaffer, who directed the film. Liam Neeson actually did a pretty good job standing in for Leslie Nielsen, although you can never truly replace him. I think in 9 universes out of 10, this movie was a terrible idea, but we happen to live in the one universe where it actually worked, and I can't believe it. Next up is the Space It Out Award for an actor who did a lot of good work that was released in a very compact time frame, and that award goes to Pedro Pascal. The Last of Us Season 2 ended on May 25th. Just a couple weeks later, Materialists hit theaters on June 13th, and less than a month later, Eddington hit theaters, and a week after that, The Fantastic Four First Steps hit theaters. That was a lot of Pedro Pascal in a very short time frame. I don't want him to get overexposed. We must protect Pedro Pascal, and his release schedule this year didn't do a lot. You could do the best work in the world, but that's just too much of one person. This is another award that I enjoy giving out. It's the Best Movie That Sounds Like a Parody Award, and I guess the longer version of that title is it's a movie that is actually really good, but sounds like the parody version of a movie that a film critic would like. And this year I'm giving it to Little Amelie, or The Character of Rain, a French-Belgian animated film about a young girl living in Japan and her metaphysical journey as she discovers what it means to be human. That sounds like something someone would write to make fun of a big Letterboxd user and the kind of movie that they enjoy, but it is actually a good film, and honestly, if there's a movie that's going to pose a serious challenge to K-pop Demon Hunters for the Academy Award this year, I think it's that one. Up next, we have the Birth Control Award. There were a lot of movies this year about the difficulties of being a parent, and specifically the difficulties of being a mother. Die My Love, starring Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson, was one of them. But the one that wins this award is If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, starring Rose Byrne, who is fantastic in the movie. But if you were on the fence about having kids and you watched that film, my guess is that you would have had your mind made up before the movie was over. It's a great drama, but it's also great birth control because a lot of people would do anything they could possibly do to avoid being in that situation. Up next is the Fetch Award. The Fetch Award goes to the franchise that Hollywood keeps trying to make happen. And this award goes to Tron. Once again, a new Tron movie hit theaters, Tron Ares, and once again, audiences didn't really care that much. The first Tron didn't do well in theaters. Tron Legacy did just well enough, I guess, for Disney to justify another Tron movie. But audiences said this year very clearly that while Tron may be beloved by a group of film geeks and effects nerds, it's not exactly a mainstream franchise. And I look forward to giving this award to Tron once again in about 15 years. Next up is the Henry Selick Award, and if you don't know who Henry Selick is, that's why I'm giving this award out. Henry Selick was the director of The Nightmare Before Christmas that everyone assumed Tim Burton directed. So the Henry Selick Award goes to the director of a film who was overshadowed by its more high-profile producer. And the award this year goes to Justin Tipping. And if you don't know Justin Tipping, he's the guy who directed the new Jordan Peele film, Him. That's right, Jordan Peele didn't direct Him, it was Justin Tipping, but he joins Henry Selick in the shadow of a high-profile producer who got all the credit. Up next is the Most Exhausting Discourse Award. It goes to the movie that had the most exhausting online conversation. The runner-up this year was Superman, whether you want to talk about Zack Snyder discourse, box office discourse, adjusted for inflation discourse. It was exhausting, but the winner this year for a 9th consecutive year is somehow The Last Jedi. I guess it's because Rian Johnson had a new movie, but I see that the conversation around Rian Johnson's Star Wars film is still ongoing. I've said it before on the channel and I'll say it again. Everything that could possibly have been said about this movie has been said, and everyone who could possibly have their mind made up one way or the other about this movie has been swayed. This discourse should be deader than Luke Skywalker, but I guess we have Ruin Johnson to blame for that one too. And finally, we have the award for Most Valuable Family. I often will give an award for Most Valuable Actor and Most Valuable Actress for each year, but there was one family that I thought really stood out. So the Most Valuable Family Award goes to the Skarsgårds. We had Stellan Skarsgård in Andor Season 2 and Sentimental Value, both amazing performances. Bill Skarsgård giving an acclaimed performance in the Gus Van Sant film Dead Man's Wire, and also returning to his role as Pennywise in It, Welcome to Derry, and Alexander Skarsgård getting award nominations for his role in the series Murderbot. Whichever Skarsgård you prefer, you can't deny that they all did great work this year, and that's what makes them our most valuable family. All right, now that those awards have been given out, let's get to my 10 favorite films of the year. And before I start at number 10, I want to recognize a few runners-up, some movies that very easily could have been on this list in a different year. One of them is The Ballad of Wallace Island, which is a really sweet comedy about trying to find love, lost love, all kinds of different lost love. It was a genuinely moving film and also a very funny film. Bring Her Back is also on my runners-up list, one of the most disturbing films that I saw this year, featuring a great performance by Sally Hawkins. Bugonia was very close to making this list. I loved Yorgos Lanthimos' latest film, featuring great turns by Emma Stone and especially Jesse Plemons. Caught Stealing by Darren Aronofsky was a really good movie that almost no one went to see, and I think it's still getting overlooked at the end of the year. Lurker is on my list. I mentioned that is, I think, the best movie that you didn't see this year. The Plague is also on this list. This is a movie that is actually going to be hitting wider release this weekend. Joel Edgerton has a smaller role in the film, and it's about a boys' water polo camp and a disease that is rumored to be spreading among them, and it really connected with me as somebody who was bullied as a kid, and I think that it's a very, very good movie. Sorry Baby was the movie that I liked the most coming out of the Sundance Film Festival of the films that I saw virtually. However, there is another Sundance movie that's actually on my top 10 list, a couple of them actually. And finally, The Voice of Hind Rajab was a film that I saw late in the year. It is an incredibly powerful, suspenseful, tragic combination of recreation as well as documentary. about the death of a young girl near the Gaza Strip just a couple of years ago that incorporates the real emergency audio that was used. I understand that the movie is centered around a very hot button issue, but there is a certain level of just human empathy and sympathy that I think this story evokes, and it was very powerfully done. So with the runners-up announced, let's get to my 10 favorite films of 2025, and we will start with number 10, and that is The Secret Agent, which is a film from Brazil. They have been on quite a run over in Brazil the last few years. Kleber Mendonça Filho wrote and directed the film. It stars Wagner Moura, who is trying to both keep his family together and escape the country. There was a time when I was watching this film that I thought it might be my favorite film of the year. It evokes the kind of 70s thriller or suspense film like The Conversation, a movie that is just steeped in its setting, steeped in the themes around the movie, genuinely suspenseful. There were some storytelling decisions that I understand later in the film that caused me to disconnect from it a little bit, but I cannot deny that it's a very well told story with well-rounded characters, and the fact that it is based around actual things. This is not necessarily a true story, but stories like it did happen. I thought it was just very, very well done, and I had to put it on my top 10 list because I think it is one of the great examples of cinema, Martin Scorsese-type cinema, that we saw this year. At number 9 is one of the Sundance movies that I mentioned, and that is Twinless from writer-director James Sweeney, who co-stars in the film along with Dylan O'Brien. I am very upset at a select group of dummies who were able to watch films online at the Sundance Film Festival, because this movie was originally available to watch online for people that couldn't go, and there were about 30 seconds of sex scenes that were leaked because some idiots saw Dylan O'Brien's butt and said, I've got to post this on the internet. They pulled this film down from the online viewing platform before I could see it, and I actually didn't get a chance to watch it until last week, or maybe even this week. And it makes me angry because I could have been talking up this movie all year, but somebody just had to post butts on Twitter. Putting all that aside, I thought this was a really good movie. It's about two guys who meet at a support group for people who have lost their identical twins. They then form a friendship, but there are many revelations that come out afterwards that kept me guessing. There were a couple of things in this movie that made my jaw drop because the movie doesn't really tip its hand that much, at least not the first time that you're watching it. And then you understand what's happening and things get darker and take more and more twists and turns. I just thought that this was a really well-written film and a really well-acted film, and I will forever be angry at those dummies for robbing me of it for those precious few months. Check it out if you haven't seen it. At number 8 is the movie that I think maybe had the biggest emotional punch for me at the end this year, which is Hamnet. I thought that the first 2/3 of the movie were good. They were very solid, some really good acting, especially from Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal and Jacoby Jupe, who I think should be in the conversation for the supporting performances and awards that are given out this year. It is based on a novel, and it is sort of an imagination of a situation with William Shakespeare and his wife Agnes and the death of one of their children. And while I enjoyed the first 2/3 of the movie, the last act, and particularly the last 20 minutes, absolutely floored me. One of the most emotional endings to a movie, not just this year, but in the last several years that I can remember. Really was able to bring all of the story threads and all of the characters and pay them off in meaningful ways. And I think that that alone put it on my top 10 list. And you add to that, of course, what I think is some A-list acting, some A-tier acting, particularly from Jessie Buckley. She's very much in the conversation for Best Actress, as well she should be. At number 7 is another film that is in contention for several awards already and may well be a big Oscar movie, and that is Sentimental Value from director Joachim Trier, starring Renate Reinsve and Stellan Skarsgård, and an incredibly talented cast. I did a full review of this movie elsewhere on the channel, but it is a very raw and what to me feels like a very real story about family and art and how those two weave into each other when you are in a family of artists, the things that it can bring to your family, the things that it can take away from your family. And this is another film where the characters are so well painted that you stop seeing actors after a certain point, and this just feels like a group of real people who have had difficult situations throughout their lives, and they're all just trying to figure out how to heal and how to live with each other. I really enjoyed this movie. It is not a fast movie. It is one that is very much about moments and moments of realization and understanding who these characters are, and the characters understanding who the other characters are. But I thought that it was fascinating, one of my favorite films of the year, and I hope that it does pick up some awards because this is another one that richly deserves it. At number 6 is a movie that I didn't necessarily think right after I saw it would go on my top 10 list, but it's one of the movies that I've thought about the most this year, and also one that I really enjoyed on first watch, and that is Wake Up Dead Man from director Rian Johnson. It is his third Benoit Blanc mystery, and I think the first time that I saw it, I enjoyed it on that mystery level, on the whodunit level. But what I have thought about since then is how the movie talks about faith and people of faith and people who don't have faith. And I love the conversation about that in the film. I've watched it now a second time, and this movie to me really is a great combination of compelling characters and great performances. Josh O'Connor, who is being positioned in the supporting categories for awards purposes, but is absolutely the lead of the film, is so good as Father Judd. Daniel Craig, of course, is great as Benoit Blanc, as he always has been. And the rest of the cast is great, including Glenn Close, who I think should be in the conversation for supporting performances, but really isn't. It's one of those movies that entertains you first, but also makes you think afterwards. And it's why this movie right now is right up there with the first Knives Out movie for my favorite in the franchise, and may very well overtake it. I think it just has that little something extra. This one to me had something a little more than the other two did, and was really enjoyable. At number 5 is a movie that just opened in limited release over the Christmas break, and that is the latest film from Park Chan-wook. It's called No Other Choice, featuring Lee Byung-hun in a fantastic lead performance, and it is maybe the best use of cinematic language that I've seen this year, meaning shot selection, cinematography, editing, transitions, all of that. Just on that level, on the technical level, it's such a well-made film. And then I think it's a really good story. It's about a man who has been in one career for a very long time. He has the life of his dreams. And then all of a sudden, his job isn't there anymore. And he has to decide what lengths he will go to in order to secure another job and secure a future for his family. It sounds super serious, and at times it really is, but at other times it is an incredibly effective black comedy. At times it's an incredibly effective thriller, suspense thriller. Sometimes you could even categorize it as a mystery. It really hops across genres, and it's also very relevant to today's world, where we are seeing rampant layoffs, where we do see companies getting rid of workers who have been there for decades and not really caring about what happens to them. It feels very of the moment, but it doesn't feel preachy, and it doesn't feel like the kind of movie that's going to feel irrelevant when we get out of this moment. Just a great stylistic design overall by Park Chan-wook, great set of performances, and really entertaining on just about every level. At number 4 is another movie that made its debut at Sundance, although it was not available for online viewing. That's why I'm very excited that I'm going to be able to cover the film festival in person this year, so I can maybe see more of these movies that might end up on my best of list at the end of the year. It's a film called Train Dreams, which was directed by Clint Bentley, who co-wrote Sing Sing. Joel Edgerton plays a logger in the Pacific Northwest right around the turn of the century who sees the world changing in front of him. Felicity Jones is his wife. And this is a movie that is very lyrical, first of all, and poetic and beautiful. I think it features the best cinematography of any movie this year, and that's saying something because there were movies with fantastic cinematography. And it also features what I think is pound for pound maybe the best supporting performance for the time that you get of the year from William H. Macy. He's great in the movie. A lot of times these sort of lyrical films that go with the flow, I mean, this is not a movie. Every time I waited for it to take a conventional turn, it didn't take that turn. Sometimes I have trouble connecting to those films. I did not have trouble connecting with this one. I actually have appreciated it more the more that I think about it. And the good news is that unlike a lot of these other movies on my list, you can watch it right now because it is streaming on Netflix. It may not be your cup of tea, but it was certainly my cup of tea. And I think it was one of the most compelling portrayals of the existence of one specific human being and what he deals with in his life, for better, for worse, sometimes just to understand the experience of it in the moment. I think it's just a beautiful film and a portrait of how you can say something about humanity by hyper-focusing on the story of one specific human. So now we're to the top 3, and let me tell you, these 3 at one point were all number 1 on my list. It is very close between these 3 movies because I think together they represent the three most memorable in-theater experiences that I had this year, as well as just some of the best uses of the tools and language of cinema. At number 3 is a movie that came out in the earlier part of the year. It's from Ryan Coogler, and it is Sinners, which was a box office smash, and I'm so glad that the movie did as well as it did. I think I can safely say now that it is an elevated vampire movie, and a really well-acted one. Of course, because it's Ryan Coogler, it's not just going to be a straight genre film. There is a lot of societal commentary going on in there, and also a really talented cast, headlined, of course, by that great dual performance from Michael B. Jordan. He was one of the sets of twins that we talked about earlier in the show. He's great. Jack O'Connell is great as the main vampire. Miles Caton, Haley Steinfeld, Wunmi Musaku, Delroy Lindo. The list goes on and on. One of the first big musical sequences that we see in the film, where Miles Caton is playing and the club expands to include generations worth of musicians and art and artists, is an incredible cinematic moment. Maybe the most memorable cinematic moment of the year for me, especially when you see it in IMAX. And the rest of the movie just built on that. I understand that it didn't do the same for everybody that it did for me, but I think that this is Ryan Coogler's best movie. I'll just say it. I know he's made some really good ones. I think this is his best movie. And it also has stuff for the gore hounds out there, for the people that just love horror. It really did offer a lot to a lot of different audiences. And even though it came out all the way back, pre-summer, it has stuck in my mind over the rest of the year and lands in my top 3. At number 2 is a movie that is currently doing very well at the box office, and I literally switched 1 and 2 on my list. This would almost be 1A, and that is Marty Supreme. I'm so happy that this film is finding an audience. I know that the Safdie level of chaos is not for everyone, but this was really one of my favorite movies of the year. Timothée Chalamet, and I've said it before, I'm a fan of his. I think that he's a fantastic actor. I know that he goes out on press tours and he says crazy stuff, and he says stuff that makes people think, well, this guy's really full of himself. And maybe that's true, but at least he has the talent to back him up, because I think this is his best performance in a very young career full of already great performances, many of which I have heralded in past years. This is a film that combines drama and comedy and suspense, at times action. Again, you'll find that a lot of these movies that are on my list are movies that are able to combine a lot of different things, either stylistically, genre-wise, or both, and that's because I appreciate those kinds of films. I love it when a director and a team of creatives can put together a project that is able to do so much so effectively in one experience. It's almost like getting a great value as a movie fan, because I laughed a lot during this movie. The ending of the film also I thought was incredibly emotionally resonant and really worked on me. And like I said, there are also suspenseful moments. You don't know what's going to happen to these characters. At times you hate the main character. At times you have sympathy for him. Most of the time you don't know what to make of him, but that is the intention of the film. Marty Supreme did so many things so well, both in front of and behind the camera, that I think it is one of the most complete movies of 2025. And it's only because there was one other film that I thought combined even more and did even more that it lands at number 2 on my list. And so now we come to number 1. A lot of times I'm not the guy that puts the movie that everybody else has at number 1 because, not everybody's brain operates the same way, but I guess I'm going to have to be boring and put the same movie at the top of my list that so many other people have, and that is Paul Thomas Anderson's One Battle After Another. This film has a very vocal group of detractors, and that's fine, but I am a very vocal person on the other side. I'm not going to say this is Paul Thomas Anderson's best film. I think that's still There Will Be Blood, but it is one of his most impressive. And it's another film that made me laugh in several moments, but also one that I thought was stunningly realized on a cinematic level. The chase scene towards the end of the film is one of those theater moments, along with the one I mentioned in Sinners, that I'm never going to forget, where a director and a cinematographer show me something in a way that I have never seen before, and that really underscores to me just what you can achieve in movies with a camera, with a story, getting an audience into this world, immersed in this world and these characters. Sean Penn, I think, gives one of the wackiest supporting performances of the year, matched perhaps only by Benicio del Toro. It's going to be very interesting to see what this supporting actor race looks like this year at the Oscars, because they both give great performances. Another great lead performance from Leonardo DiCaprio. Chase Infinity, I thought, was very good in this movie. Tiana Taylor is getting a lot of Oscar buzz for her role, and I really enjoyed Regina Hall in her role, which was small, but I think very, very effective. One Battle After Another is one of those movies that I think will be remembered for many different reasons over the years. And it's always tough for me to decide what movie is going to be my number one, because I feel like it has to be a movie that when you go back and look at it 5 or 10 years from now, you don't say, why did he put that movie in the top spot? I would imagine some of my picks you might have thought that about. And it's a movie that joins films like Oppenheimer and Tar, which were number one movies of mine. I think that this one is worthy to stand with those. And again, no matter which way you want to look at it, from a writing level, from a cinematic level, from an acting level, it's hard for me to look at it and say that anything other than top-notch work was done. And when you can show me top-notch work in basically every element of the game, everything that you can do with movies, and for me to not really have many or any criticisms of the film, that's what gets it to number one. So One Battle After Another takes number one on my top 10 list, but when I look at the rest of that list, there's so many interesting films there. I don't necessarily know if the bench was as deep this year as it has been in other years. This wasn't as hard of a list to put together as far as what to include and what not to include, but I think that the 10 that are on here will stand up with any other 10 films that I've done since I've been doing this channel. And it was really fun to sit back and re-experience them and decide what I was going to put on that list. So we talked about the best. Let's take a few minutes here, though, to talk about the worst. The 5 movies that I think showed you the least of what cinema is able to capture. Now, I don't see as many bad movies as I used to. I used to go see pretty much everything that came out, but I don't necessarily. I kind of self-select the movies that I watch a bit more, just because time and life are precious. So I'm not necessarily saying that these are the 5 worst movies of the year, but they were the 5 that left me the least impressed. And we will start with number 5 on this list, which is I Know What You Did Last Summer, the reboot or remake or whatever you want to call it of the 90s horror franchise. I think you had a germ of an interesting idea here, maybe, but they did absolutely nothing with that idea. It was the same tired horror movie you've seen over and over again, with some story choices that I think were a borderline insult to fans of the original franchise. They were promising perhaps that they would do more. I have no interest in what they're going to be doing next summer or the summer after that. Hopefully what I am doing next summer is not sitting in a theater watching another one of these movies. At number 4 on my list is Megan 2.0, which wasn't a terrible movie, but was a great example on how you can just absolutely fumble a promising franchise. The first Megan film was a big box office success based on the memeability and everything like that. And when making the sequel, apparently the decision was made to completely ignore what people loved about the first movie, do something completely different that wasn't anywhere close to as fun, and fail miserably. And consequently, the Megan franchise, when it looked like it was just getting started, may now be over. I don't know exactly why they made the choices they did with this film, but I think that they were the wrong choices. And this is going to be a study, along with Joker Folie à Deux, I think, in the future, about how to kill a franchise that perhaps had some mileage left in it. At number 3 is The Electric State from Netflix, which was their biggest ever original movie and put up absolutely pedestrian numbers, which is honestly fitting because it's an absolutely pedestrian movie. There is nothing special about this film. It is the most generic Netflix slop you can imagine. I don't know why they decided to invest as much money in that script as they did. The Russo brothers, you would expect more from them working on a stage this big, and the cast, you would think, would do better with what they were given. But this just seemed like streaming movie, the movie. I don't know if it was dumbed down intentionally for the streaming audience, but it was a big misstep. And I think maybe Netflix decided to do it because they thought it was the safe bet. This is a great example that the safe bet may sometimes be the most risky thing you can do as a company. At number 2, and I'm not saying this was necessarily the second worst movie of the year, but it was an example of how not to continue down a bad road, was the Disney live-action remake of Snow White. This was the PR movie from hell when you looked at the people that were in the cast with Rachel Zegler and Gal Gadot, but this was also just not a good movie. It felt like 2 different takes of Snow White mashed together. Perhaps that's what happened at some stage, maybe in the script stage, but just way to not please anybody with one of these movies. You're not going to please the Disney purists because it's too different. You're not going to please the people that don't like rote adaptations of Disney classic movies because they also did that in the movie. This was a great lesson on how to waste about $200 million by a studio. Disney's actually written the book on that. They've wasted a lot of $200 million movies in the last few years. Snow White was another one of them, and really what a shame for the movie that put Walt Disney on the map. And now we come to number one. Now, I've said before, I'm not necessarily saying that these are the worst movies of the year. When it comes to number one, I am absolutely saying it is the worst movie of the year. And as a matter of fact, there is one redeeming thing about this film, which is that it was the subject of my most watched video ever on this channel, and that is War of the Worlds, starring Ice Cube. An absolute incompetence, a piece of incompetence at every single stage, writing, acting, editing, deciding to release it, you name it. This is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Full stop. It is both bad and hilariously bad and also offensively bad. It is bad on every level that you can be bad. I don't know who greenlit this. I don't know who watched it and said you should put it out. You know, when you've been around as long as I have, almost 43 years, you start to think that maybe movies have run out of ways to surprise you with how bad they are. But War of the Worlds made me feel alive again because I got to see a truly horrible movie done in a way that I'd never seen one done before. So I guess I have War of the Worlds to thank, both for my number one video ever on the channel and also for the little spark of life, a new way to suck that I didn't realize was possible. So War of the Worlds, number one on my worst of 2025 list, and that is the end of this video. What do you think? Were there some movies there that you loved that didn't make the cut? Were there some movies there that you didn't love that you think should have been on my worst list? Let me know down in the comments below, and be sure to stay tuned right here on the channel. Of course, later today is the series finale of Stranger Things. Normally, I would have that review out tomorrow, but as I mentioned, I'm dealing with some things right now that have my schedule in a little bit of flux. So if you don't see my review of the series finale of Stranger Things tomorrow, you will see it here on the channel at some point in the future. And also thank you to everybody in the audience after Monday's show, after Charts, that expressed support and said, hey, we'll be here whenever you can do it. I really do appreciate that. It is very tough sometimes to balance this job with the requirements outside of this job, because I can't just take a day off like people can at other jobs. I mean, I could, but it could possibly be to my own detriment. So it can sometimes be a tough balancing act. I think I'm getting the balance right, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's always easy. So thank you in advance if that is delayed here on the channel. And thank you for watching this video. Like I said, I usually want it to be a little bit more polished than it is, but the movies remain the same and my choices remain the same. So I hope that you enjoyed me talking about the best and worst movies of 2025. I hope you have a very happy new year, and I'll see you back here very soon. Bye.